In 1978, a social psychologist named Ellen Langer ran an experiment at a library photocopier. A researcher approached the queue and asked to skip ahead. When she gave a real reason, "Because I'm in a rush," 94% of people complied. When she gave no reason at all, just asked to skip, compliance dropped to 60%. But when she said, "Because I have to make some copies," a reason that explained nothing, compliance rose back to 93%. The word "because" had done all the work. The reason had done none. What Langer had documented was not an anomaly. It was a feature, a cognitive shortcut that the human nervous system uses to reduce the metabolic cost of decision-making. Your brain is not designed to evaluate every request it receives. It is designed to pattern match against a set of learned signals that historically correlated with safety, reciprocity, authority, and social consensus. When those signals are present, compliance follows automatically, and the people who have studied how to produce those signals without their natural conditions can reliably produce the compliance without the conditions. Robert Cialdini, in his foundational research on influence, calls these shortcuts fixed action patterns, sequences of behavior that occur in the same order every time a specific trigger is present. In the animal kingdom, a mother turkey will nurture a stuffed polecat, its natural enemy, if the polecat emits a recorded version of the cheeping sound that turkey chicks make. Remove the sound and she attacks it. The trigger overrides the evidence. You operate on the same architecture. Your brain has a set of triggers that, when activated, initiate a compliance sequence before your conscious reasoning has had time to evaluate whether it should. The difference between you and the turkey is that the people who study your triggers do not need to be in the same room as you. They can deploy them at scale, through language, design, and social architecture, with precision that would have been impossible to imagine 50 years ago. The first and most ancient of these triggers is reciprocity, the deep neurological obligation to return what has been given to you. This principle is evolutionarily ancient. It allowed early human groups to share resources and engage in the kind of delayed exchange that would have been impossible without a reliable mechanism for ensuring repayment. Anthropologists have documented it in every human culture studied without exception. In 1971, psychologist Dennis Regan demonstrated what happens when this principle is weaponized. In his study, participants who received an unsolicited 10-cent Coke from a stranger felt compelled to buy twice as many raffle tickets from that stranger as those who had received nothing. The compliance was not correlated with whether the participant liked the person. It did not matter. The obligation the gift created was strong enough to override personal preference entirely. This is the mechanism behind every unsolicited sample, every free trial, every small gift that arrives before an ask. The gift is not generosity. It is a debt instrument. And it is placed on you without your consent, which means the first line of defense is simply knowing that the obligation you feel is a trigger response, not a moral duty. The second trigger is commitment and consistency, the compulsion to behave in ways that align with your prior decisions and stated self-image, even when those decisions no longer serve you. In 1966, researchers Freedman and Fraser documented what is now called the foot-in-the-door technique. Homeowners who agreed to display a small 3-inch sign supporting a public safety campaign in their window were, 2 weeks later, 76% more likely to agree to have a large, intrusive billboard placed on their front lawn, compared to those who had never been asked about the small sign. The small commitment had done something more than produce a small behavior. It had altered the participants' self-image. They now saw themselves as people who supported public causes. And when the large request came, refusing it would have required confronting the inconsistency between their stated identity and their actual choice. The self-image became the leverage. The small request had manufactured the vulnerability that the large one exploited. Every subscription that begins with a free trial, every political campaign that begins with a petition signature, every relationship that begins with a small, reasonable request, these are engineered to produce the self-image shift first and the compliance second. The third trigger is authority, the automatic deference to perceived expertise or legitimacy. Stanley Milgram's obedience research is typically discussed as a study of situational evil. In the context of compliance, it reveals something more structural. That authority does not merely influence decisions, it replaces them. When a legitimate authority figure assumes what Milgram called the definition of the situation, the individual does not experience a conflict between their conscience and an instruction. They experience a transfer of responsibility. The system becomes the moral agent, and they become its instrument. This is why credentials, uniforms, and titles produce compliance independent of their actual relevance. A doctor's recommendation carries more weight than a neighbor's identical advice. An expert's endorsement closes a sale that the product alone could not. Operating alongside authority is social proof, the shortcut by which you determine what is correct by observing what others around you believe or do. In an ambiguous situation, you look to the group for a signal. The problem is that the group is looking to you. The result is pluralistic ignorance, a collective failure of response in which everyone assumes, from the apparent calm of everyone else, that no action is required. This is why bystanders fail to act in emergencies, and it is why manufactured social consensus, the salted tip jar, the artificially long queue, functions as a compliance tool independent of any actual consensus existing. The final and most viscerally effective trigger is scarcity. Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize-winning research on loss aversion established that human beings are consistently more motivated by the prospect of losing something they have than by the prospect of gaining something of equal value. The threat of loss produces a stronger, faster, and more persistent motivational response than the promise of gain. When this asymmetry is combined with genuine or manufactured scarcity, a limited time offer, a final notice, a dwindling stock counter, it produces what psychologist Jack Brem termed psychological reactance, a state of heightened arousal triggered by the perception that a freedom or option is being removed. Brem documented that when people believe access to something is being restricted, they want it more, value it more, and are willing to pay more for it, regardless of any change in its actual utility. The limited edition is not a supply fact. It is a trigger deployment. The countdown timer is not a logistical constraint. It is a neurological intervention designed to narrow your attention, elevate your arousal, and compress the window between impulse and action to the point where rational evaluation cannot occur. What Cialdini's research reveals, taken together, is not that you are weak or irrational. It is that you are operating on hardware that was calibrated for an environment that no longer exists. The shortcuts, reciprocity, consistency, authority, social proof, scarcity, were genuine adaptive mechanisms. In the social context they evolved to serve, they produced reliable outcomes. The problem is not the shortcut. The problem is that the trigger can now be reproduced independently of the condition it was designed to detect. A gift that creates genuine indebtedness between people in a community where reciprocity is enforced through repeated interaction is a social mechanism. A gift from a company you will never encounter again, deployed specifically to activate the same neurological sequence, is a manipulation. The nervous system cannot tell the difference, which is why you can. Understanding the 6 principles of compliance does not make you immune to them. They operate below the level of conscious reasoning, which means awareness alone does not deactivate them. But awareness does change what happens after the response fires. You notice the obligation. You name it as a trigger. And you create a space between the click and the run, which is exactly the space in which a genuine decision can be made. The people who profit from your automatic compliance are counting on that space never opening. Compliance is the dark art of making the engine believe it is the driver. The next pattern we are covering is what happens when someone has studied all 6 of these principles and decided to use them without a conscience. That video is linked here.